Well, it's great to be here with you today. I've been to many Confederation Club luncheons over the years, probably the last 15 years. Always on that side of the podium. For the first time on this side of the podium, I might pass it off to Dr. Kay at some point to fill in some of the gaps. But you know, it's really great to be here. I was speaking with my wife earlier this week, and I said to her, you know, honey, would you ever imagine in your wildest dreams that one day I would be invited back to the Confederation Club, where I received an award as a student, to then give the keynote address? Would you ever imagine that in your wildest dreams? And she turned to me and said, you know, with a very serious face, honey, you've never been in my wildest dreams. And off we go. So there'll be a lot of numbers that I throw at you today, and we'll do the best job at me being over here and the slides being over there. Far too small, but we'll survive. So the first and the one that people are usually most interested in is the horse race, right? If the election were to happen today, what would the popular vote be, and who would win the election? Well, I think history and where we came from is important. So the results you see in front of you are the results of the election back in 2014. Of course, the Liberals won. It was supposed to be a change election, but the Liberals won. The one before that was supposed to be a change election, but the Liberals won. So there's a bit of a theme happening here in Ontario, but you'll see that it probably won't repeat itself again. Here you see the results out of the Patrick Brown era. The Liberals, of course, were doing fairly well, actually, for their first 2 years in government, and then all of a sudden things changed and people soured on them, and they were in power at that time for 13 years. So it stands to reason that that's going to happen. But the Tories were pretty well in the lead, but it could still be considered a three-way race right up till the end of December of last year. And then we hear about Patrick Brown allegations, and what changes? Virtually nothing. The Tories continue to be in the driver's seat at 38%, actually improving slightly over pre-allegation polling. And then we get the election of a new leader in Mr. Doug Ford, and what changes? Nothing. The Tories still continue to be in the driver's seat with roughly 40% of the vote. And you see some almost oscillation between the NDP and the Liberals, going back and forth, tied, and one party pulls out, and it's tied again, another party pulls out, but essentially a tie for second place. This last week, we released a poll, what's today, Thursday? Yeah, we released a poll on Tuesday, and this was the poll. What's changed for the Tories? Nothing. But what's changed for everybody else? A lot, right? The NDP up 6 points in just 1 week. We do not measure changes in public opinion of this magnitude in such a short period of time very often. So something is happening out there. The Liberals have softened to 22% of the vote province-wide. The Green Party, 3%. It's actually all other parties combined. We get a lot of fan mail from Green Party supporters saying, why don't you prompt the Green Party? And the reason we don't is because if we put the Green Party in there, people use it as a sort of a none of the above protesty thing, and you'll get 12% of people saying they're going to vote for the Green Party, but it ain't going to happen, right? So the way that we deal with that is we just put some other party, include the Green Parties in there, and we found that we've got a really good accuracy on the Green Party using this approach. So what does a Tory voter look like? Well, a Conservative voter, I mean, there's some in this room here, but I should mention, of course, Ipsos is a non-partisan firm. We haven't done any political polling for parties for 25 years. So I don't have a horse in the race, and part of the fun part of my job, I'm sure Louisa likes this aspect of her job as well, is I can crap on everyone, right? It's like we don't play favorites, right? So we can say, oh, this is where these people screwed up, and these people are doing this wrong, and those people are doing this wrong. It's a lot easier just to be friends with no one, and it's a lot more fun. So a Tory voter, what do they look like? Well, they dominate in the 905. The Tories are ahead of the NDP by 20 points in the 905. That alone makes the game over, essentially, if that lead holds. because we have more seats this time around, redistribution. Where do those seats get added? In the growing regions of the province. Where are those regions? In the 905. Certainly we had one additional seat added here in this region. The Tories do really well among men, among less educated people, among Gen Xers and who I have this way, Gen Xers and boomers. Those who are pessimistic about the economy. They've got 45% of the vote among those who think that things aren't going very well economically. And sort of the middle income. So it's kind of the average person, right? You know, not most highly educated, but doing okay financially, a little bit grumpy about the economy, men living in 905, Eastern Ontario doing fairly well, rural, right? Rural but not north. So what do Liberal voters look like? Well, this slide is difficult because the Liberals don't have a lot of support at the moment. But if you were to say what they look like, well, they're more likely to be in the 416, but they're still in third place at the moment in the 416 in Toronto proper. They do better among women than men. They're more educated. They're much more likely to have university degrees. They're younger. They do better among those optimistic about the economy. And they're higher income. So, you know, that's why you'll hear Tories talking about elites, elites, elites. It's code for Liberals because they happen to be, you know, higher educated, have a little bit more money than supporters of the other parties. So that's why that vernacular works. It's code language, essentially. What do the NDP look like? Well, also 416. They're in first place right now in Toronto proper, and first place right now in southwestern Ontario, where we are here. And of course Northern Ontario, which is a traditional NDP country. They do better among women than men. They also more highly educated. I'm sure you know a lot of your associates at the university are flying the orange flag these days. One or two of them. I remember a couple of them as Champagne socialists, if I remember correctly. They do really well among millennials, right? Those under the age of 35 are very popular among the NDP. Also pessimistic about the economy. Oftentimes people ask me, what's the difference between an NDP supporter and a Liberal supporter? Because they often feel similarly about policies. They often look the same in terms of their demographics. And the key point of differentiation in this election is that Liberal supporters think things are going really well with the economy, and NDP supporters don't agree. And neither do Tory supporters. Turnout, of course, is important, and we've still got quite a lot of time left in the election campaign. And so we want to ask people who declare their vote choice, how certain are you of your choice? And 87% of people say they're at least fairly certain of their choice. I'm really interested in the 44% who say they're absolutely certain. They're not going to move. This is who they're going to vote for. And on the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see the percentage of each party's supporters who say they're absolutely certain to vote for that particular party. And you can see that Tory voters are most committed to their choice. So when we look back at that horse race slide that I showed, the very first one, and that Tory line is 39, 40, 38, hasn't changed despite harassment allegations of our leader, a new leader, one that's more divisive than an easier choice might have been, nothing changes because the Conservatives are the most certain of their choice. Liberal voters, only 31% of people who still even now say that they would vote Liberal are absolutely certain, and it's still only 46% among NDP. So that center-left progressive side of the equation, a lot less locked in than the right side. So the Tory number will probably stay around there for the rest of the campaign, and the outcome will be determined by those voting Liberal and NDP and where they go. And if they split the vote, the Tories will walk to victory. And if the anti-Ford vote coalesces behind one particular party, then we have a more interesting race. Now, we also want to know who's people's second choice is. So if you're not very confident that you're going to vote for the person who said you are, who would you pick second? Well, on the left-hand side, we have the overall totals. Only 9% of people who didn't pick the Tories as their first choice picked the Tories as their second choice. So there's not a lot of room to grow there, right? The Tories have essentially capped out. You're not going to see them moving up to 45, 48% of the vote. It's not going to happen. So that 40% is committed to them, but likely not going to grow. 18% said they'd pick the Liberal Party second. 28% said they'd pick the NDP Party second. So who's got the most opportunity to still grow? The NDP. They're only 5 points behind the Tories, and the second choice of 49% of Liberal voters. And the second choice of even 19% 41% of Tory voters. So the Liberals have more room to fall and maybe a little bit more room to grow. The NDP has a lot more room to grow. So if people believe that the NDP poses the best alternative to the Ford, potential for Ford government, that's where they're going to go. So the underlying theme of this campaign is change. Back at the election time, 32% said the government deserved re-election, and it got re-elected with a slightly higher percent of popular vote, meaning that people voted for the Liberals without necessarily believing that they deserved re-election. They just didn't like the other choices available. And that number has been eroding from 2014 to where we are now, earlier this week, to only 20% of the population who believes the government deserves to be re-elected. On the other side, change is 80%. When 8 in 10 people want you gone, that's really tough inertia to fight. And it is the entire underlying theme of this campaign, change. And that's why the Liberals are doing so poorly right now, is because people have made up their mind, and it's going to be really, really hard for Kathleen Wynne to convince people to reconsider. They've been around for 15 years as Liberals. What's left to consider, right? This is the choice that people are left with. And one of the other reasons we ask this question is because that green line, the Wynne government deserves re-election, is almost always bang on to what the popular vote the incumbent receives on election day. A lot of times it's more accurate than asking who you're going to vote for. So this is a very interesting proxy, and it spells a lot of trouble for the Premium. Approval ratings were close to half at re-election time, and they've eroded. At one point were 26%. This was in the height of the hydro price debate. Rebounded a little bit in March, and now rests at about 3 in 10. 30% support for the Premier is lower than the percentage approval rating for Mr. Donald Trump in the United States. So that provides a little bit of context as to how badly things are going for the Premier of Ontario right now. This was a very important change of public opinion just in the last week. Back last week, 41% of Ontarians thought that the Liberals posed the best chance of stopping a Ford government, compared to 25% for the NDP was the best option for stopping a Ford government. And in 1 week, the NDP figure goes from 25 to 36, and the Liberal figure goes from 41 to 31. So a plurality now believe that the NDP is the best alternative to a Ford government, not the Liberals. And so what becomes the Premier's argument, right? That anti-Ford vote is coalescing behind the NDP banner, and that's why they're up 6 points in the last week. So if this trend continues, the NDP will continue to rise as people defect from the Liberals. But this is important because it explains why the Tories are still in the lead. If we ask people who has the best chance of defeating Kathleen Wynne, the Liberals, 57% say it's the Tories, but only 29% say it's the Liberals. So go back to the first question I posed. Do we want change? The answer is yes. Who's best to deliver that change? And the answer is the Tories, right? Not yet the Liberals. So there's a big gap there, sorry, not yet the NDP. There's a big gap there for the NDP to fill to convince people that they're actually the better alternative to the Wynne government for those who are kicking the tires of the PC party. Ontarians want change on training wheels. Half say they want a majority government, and fully half want a minority government. I think, we used to think of minority governments almost in a pejorative sense. Nothing gets done, we're back into an election, 12 to 18 months down the road. If that's what we get, we'll deal with it, but it's not the ideal circumstance. But we're actually now seeing that half want a majority, half want a minority. Now, among those who want a majority government, they want a Tory majority. Among those who want a minority government, they want an NDP-led minority government, right? So a lot of different motivations circulating in people's minds. Tory voters want that Tory government. NDP voters want an NDP government, but maybe not a majority, because we remember what happened the last time, and we're just a little bit cautious of that. So we posed some options to Ontarians and said, well, what do you like? The Conservatives governing with support from the NDP. Not very likely to happen, and yet 56% of Ontarians support that election outcome. In fact, that was the preferred election outcome. A Tory government with support from the NDP. Interesting. Number 2 at 49%. The NDP with support from the Liberals. Okay. 47% is the NDP with support from the Conservatives. Again, the other way around. Only 42% want the Liberals governing with support from the NDP. Only 1 in 3 want Conservatives governing with support from the Liberals, and only 27 want the Liberals with support from the Conservatives. People don't want the Liberals and Conservatives working together. So if this is going to work, then it either needs to be the NDP and the Liberals, or the NDP and the Conservatives in some way, shape, or form. I don't see that government lasting too long. So let's move away from the horse race and the vote and talk a little bit about the leaders. Again, a massive change in the last week alone. Nearly half of Ontarians believe that Andrew Horwath would make the best Premier of Ontario. That's up 9 points in 1 week. Only 18% say the current Premier would make the best Premier from Ontario, and 36% for Doug Ford. And if you look at that blue line and trace it back to the left, it didn't change when Ford took over. It didn't change after the Patrick Brown incident. It only changed after Tim Hudak stopped becoming leader, or stopped acting as leader of the party. So Andrew Horwath is very popular at the moment. 48% have a favorable opinion of Horwath, compared to only 12% unfavorable. Now, a lot of people are in the middle. She's sort of, vanilla ice cream, right? Doesn't offend anybody, but it might not be your first choice. So we've got vanilla ice cream in the lead here. We've got Doug Ford, and everybody says Doug Ford, what a divisive guy. Okay, 33% favorable towards Mr. Ford, 46% unfavorable, including 32% who say they're very unfavorable. So yeah, I mean that label works. He is divisive. Well, if he's divisive, what word can we use to describe Kathleen Wynne, who has 62% of the population saying that they're unfavorable towards her, including 46%, nearly 1/2 of Ontarians say they're very favorable impressions of the Premier, compared to only 20% who's favorable. So, we can speculate about how people are scared of Ford and don't like him and this, that, and the other thing. Well, they're less hot on the Premier, right? So the Tories are doing well, probably, well, in some part because of Ford, but in other parts in spite of Ford. And Andrew Horwath is popular, and I think that is why a lot of people are starting to look at the NDP perhaps as an alternative to the Liberals. On personality traits, Doug Ford has an advantage in many important areas that help determine how people are going to vote. Someone who will get things done. He's got to impress you, roll up his sleeves, and help the average guy. Someone who's best to manage during tough economic times. Someone who will tackle Ontario's deficit, which is a key issue of the campaign. Someone who will sort out the hydro situation. Does firing the board do anything? Probably not, but the language is good, right? Let's get rid of those guys who make $8 million a year. That resonates with people, particularly Conservative supporters. And someone who will stand up for Ontario's interests within Canada. That's his advantage. So the tough guy, right? The tough guy attitude. That's part of the Ford brand. Where does Horwath have the advantage? Someone who will protect the interests of minorities in Ontario. Someone who will fight for the middle class. Someone who will improve health care. Who will run a responsible, ethical government, open government. Someone whose values best represent my own. Interestingly, Tories often do a little bit better on that metric, but in this case, Horwath has the lead. Someone who will make housing more affordable. That's a key plank of the NDP platform. and someone who has the right temperament to be Premier. And you can see there that Mr. Ford and the Premier are tied for second on that particular mention. Now let's look at the win advantage. There isn't one. She doesn't lead on any category at all, and in fact is in third place on most of those categories. So we understand why the Liberals are struggling, because the Premier has lost credibility to manage almost anything. The deficit is an interesting situation because we just released a poll this week that showed that 7 in 10 Ontarians want reduced spending and balancing the books, as opposed to deficits or raised taxes. Not too many who want higher taxes. But 7 in 10, including a majority of voters for every party. That's a consensus. When can we agree on anything to that extent in the province of Ontario? And I think the seeds were sown last year when the Premier did balance the books. And then in an election year decided it was the appropriate time for a deficit spending, hanging all these goodies in front of people, and the electorate called BS on that one, right? Yeah. And it backfired spectacularly. And now on financial matters, budgets, deficits, and just about anything else, the Premier has lost a lot of capital. And interestingly, we have significant proportions of the population, ranging from 1/3 to 1/2, who say that nobody is best equipped to deal with gridlock. I just came in from the airport this morning, I can attest to that. Someone you can trust, ooh, that's an interesting one. Someone who will spend taxpayers' money wisely, although Doug Ford is tied with none of the above for that one, so maybe a slight advantage to Ford in that one. And I love this one. Someone you'd like to have a beer or coffee with. 4 in 10 Ontarians say, I don't want to have a beer or coffee with any of these people. I could have specified who's paying. That might have had an impact on the results. But, you know, people are apathetic. And I think turnout may be lower as a result. 3/4 said they want different leaders to choose from, including 1 in 3 who strongly agree with this. They don't like any of them. So if you don't like anybody, it's a lot easier to vote for somebody than against somebody. So I think a lot of people will be doing one of two things: holding your nose and voting, or watching Netflix. Let's talk a little bit about the issues of the campaign. How I do with the time. Okay. So what are the top issues of the campaign? Well, they're probably the ones at the top of your mind as well. Healthcare, number one, always number one. Dr. Kay always used to say it's a sacred cow of politics and issues. Healthcare, always number one, except when the economy is not doing well. If we're in a recession, the economy will slightly overtake typically, but every other time healthcare is number one. Number 2, the economy and jobs. Number 3, lower taxes. Number 4, lower energy costs. Number 5, debt and balancing the budget. All other issues are secondary. And those people who spend too much time talking about those issues are talking about the wrong thing. Let's look at those top 5 issues in a little bit more detail. And we see that the NDP owns that healthcare. People believe the NDP is the best party to deal with healthcare, whatever that means, if it's doctor shortages or emergency room wait times or specialists, etc. The belief is that the NDP leads on this. In fact, the Tories and Liberals are very close. But on issues 2, 3, 4, and 5, economy, taxes, energy, and balancing the budget, the Tories have a sizable advantage. This also explains why they're doing well in the polls, because they've convinced voters and differentiated themselves from the other parties on the issues that matter most to Ontarians. Where do the Liberals lead? The legalization of marijuana. Well, that may be important for the 8 people in our survey who chose that one, right? But it's not speaking to the people out there that you need more than 8 votes from, you know, in order to win the election. So the Tories have done this well. They've stuck to the issues that matter most, and other parties would do well to pay attention more to the issues that matter most, and differentiate themselves from the other parties on that if they want to gain traction. This is the data that underlied that article that Louisa just mentioned in her very kind introduction, that this frustration and anger. And why would we even ask about this? Well, we're seeing a trend around the world of this, of populism, of nativism in some cases, that is resonating with people and is causing them to throw off the establishment. I mean, this sounds very revolutionary, but it led to Brexit. It led to Trump. And the people who think that these attitudes don't exist in Ontario are wrong, because they do. Maybe not to the same extent as some of these other places I've talked about, but 3/4 think that the economy is rigged to advantage the rich and powerful. 3/4. Why do they think that? Well, the economy is growing, and the jobless rate is lower than it's been in a long time. But the economy is growing, and yet 2 in 3 still say it's difficult for someone like them to get ahead in this province. And they're struggling to get ahead. So if the economy is doing well, but I'm not improving, there's a missing piece of that puzzle. So who's doing well on my back? Right? And that leads to frustration, and 3/4 saying it's rigged to the rich and powerful. And 7 in 10 say the traditional parties don't care about them.
Exactly.
So it's no wonder you've got 81% of Ontarians, so a majority of every party's supporters, saying that Ontario needs a strong leader to take things back from the rich and powerful. Which leader brands themselves in that way most effectively? Doug Ford, right. That's why he's doing well. And that's why, even though he's got such strong proportion of the population who have unfavorable impressions of him, he doesn't care about those people, okay, for vote purposes. He's speaking to his base, and it resonates. So here are the 2 competing themes of the campaign: change versus fear. 65% say the election is about making sure that the Win Liberals aren't re-elected, and for half it's about stopping Ford. So we're going to continue to monitor this and see whether or not that balance shifts. And if that balance shifts towards stopping Ford, the NDP will probably win the election. But if it stays the way it is now, this desire for change, and the Tories are presenting themselves as real significant change, you know, this will, if this stays the same, then the vote will stay the same. People will be locked in. We get a lot more fan mail too, and the fan mail happens with the greatest regularity when polls get things wrong, right? And there have been some fairly spectacular misses in the polling industry in the last couple of years. Brexit, the BC election, not this most recent one, but the one before. Trump, although I did some analysis on Trump, like some really pinpoint analysis, and found that if 70,000 voters split across a couple key counties in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and like Detroit, 70,000 total across all of them, either don't show up or change their vote, the election goes the other way. 70,000 people in a country of 300 million, right? That's how close it was. Polling cannot be that precise. We were actually more accurate in our popular vote predictions than we were in the previous election. It's just the Electoral College, as Dr. Kay is always talking about, screws things up for us. So why does polling sometimes fail? Let's give you the Coles notes. 1, coverage error. Who are we missing? Who aren't we capturing in our polls? And the second is differential turnout. And it's very volatile from one election to the next. Who's going to show up to vote? So in short, we need to do 3 things in order to predict the outcome of an election, which, by the way, we don't really do. We provide the polling, and we leave it to people like Dr. Kay and others to figure out how that's going to model into seats. Our business isn't seat modeling. Our business is capturing public opinion. So the first thing we need to do is accurately poll the population of eligible voters to determine vote preference. That's what we do, and we actually think we do that quite well. Number 2 is estimate how many are going to show up. How many are going to show up? What percentage of the population is going to vote? And the third is estimate who is going to show up. So of that 65% of the population who's going to vote, what do they look like? Are they older? Are they younger? How does it compare to the previous election? Who's staying home? Who's showing up? So deal with coverage error first. So what we're doing in our most important polls is this. We're doing telephone landlines. So calling people, random digit dialing, to get them while they're home, asking them how they vote. But of course, some people don't. Put up your hand if you don't have a landline. Don't have a landline, right? Okay, so there's coverage. We're missing all of those people. Number 2, cell phones. Now, roughly half of the numbers in interviews that we do are on people's cell phones. Okay. Put up your hand if you don't have a cell phone. Very good. See, so that's okay. We'd be missing Larry, we'd be missing Barry, we'd be missing a couple other people. So that's not good enough. And how many people just wouldn't pick up their phone to talk to a pollster? Yeah, knock it off. Making our job harder. Online panels. We have panels of hundreds of thousands of people who have been pre-screened and recruited and agreed to do surveys with us. We know like everything about them. If they have a cat, if they're diabetic, if the cat's diabetic, where they live, what their income is, and we can draw and create a sample that reflects the population parameters of the province. So we do that from the online panels. How many of you are not a part of an online panel? Yeah, probably most of you. Right. And is there something a little bit, okay, put up your hand if you are a part of an online panel, you do surveys from time to time. Yeah, is there something a little bit weird about, like, do you think you're a little bit different from the average person, or do you think you're completely average guy, right? So the theory is that even if demographically we make the sample look like the population, there's still something attitudinally or behaviorally different about these people who agree to participate in online polls, right? What is it? I have yet to figure it out, but it does skew towards the left. We oversample NDP on online panels, even when we control for demographics. So then what do? Online non-panel sources. So we're bringing in people who aren't on panels to conduct, to participate in our research online. So what does this mean? Well, it could be a banner ad when you're on Google. You could be playing Candy Crush and run out of lollipops, and you can do a survey to get 5 lollipops, right? This is how we get people under the age of 35, right? We bring them in through social media and through online. So the idea is that the truth is somewhere in the middle, right? That we haven't systematically missed anybody because we're getting all kinds of different sources and putting them all together. A little bit of magic in how we do that. We're still working through it. Because the only time we can have anything to compare to is an election. It happens every 4 years. The second thing I said was turnout. The top 5 bars deal with turnout at the last provincial election. It was 51.3%. It was lower in 2011, but higher as we go back to 99. So a spread high to low of about 10 points. For turnout at federal elections, we're somewhere, again, 10-point spread from the high 50s to the high 60s. It's really hard to know which one you're going to get, right? I suspect, as I said, this one might be lower turnout. And here's the problem magnified. So 18 to 24-year-olds in 2011 federal election, 39% of those people showed up to vote, 39%. In 2015, 57% showed up to vote. That was for Trudeau, right? So you know that Trudeau's going to do better among millennials, but you don't really know if that's going to get them off the couch and into the voting booth. So in this case, it did. Now let's take another group for comparison. 55 to 64-year-olds. In 2011, 65% of them voted, and in 2015, 67% voted. So if you say, well, we're anticipating maybe turnout's going to go up by 5 points, you just can't go 5 points. You have to go, well, maybe it's 1 point among boomers and 2 points among Gen Xers and 8 points among millennial men, who have a cat. It's really, really complicated, right? And it's really hard to predict. And why can't we just ask people if they're going to vote? Because 73% say they voted in the last Ontario election, and the real result was 51. 78% say they voted in the last federal election, the real result was 68. 70% say they voted in the 2011 provincial election, turnout was 48.2. 66% say they voted in the most recent municipal election. I mean, in Toronto, it's 50, right? In KW, Louise, at 25, maybe? Like, it's abysmal, right? And yet 2/3 say, now, they're not all fibbing. Some people forget. Other people, but there's a lot of social desirability there, right? Oh, yeah, I vote, sure. And 68% say that they're certain, like a 9 or a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10, that they're actually going to go out and vote. So what do you do with this? And if we just looked at, for example, the vote choice among those who say they're absolutely certain they're going to vote, this is what it looks like. The Tories crush it with 46% of the popular vote. And we know that, you know, they're supported by older demographics. Older people are more likely to vote every time. That there's less fluctuation. So this sort of makes sense, but the difference isn't going to be that much. Turnout's not going to push them up by 6 points. So just some final thoughts to leave you with. The first is that the PCs will win if the vote splits on the left. So all eyes are on Horvath now as the anti-Ford vote begins to assemble under the NDP ban. The Liberals have very little chance of resurrection. There is nothing in there that is a glimmer of hope. Which, I mean, I'm prepared to eat my shirt, right? Like, that means exactly. Which is stronger, the desire for change or fear of Ford? Right, so those, because we know we want change, park that narrative. And it's, okay, what's more important? The person that I think is really going to change things up, which is Ford, or the anti-Ford vote, which would be probably on the NDP at this particular point in time. NDP remains the most important battleground, sorry, the 905 remains the most important battleground, and the Tories have a 20-point lead there right now, which is essentially a wipeout, right? They'll pick up virtually the whole region. And who shows up to vote is key and will determine a lot of the swing ridings, like, for example, History Center, which is, I think a three-person race, but maybe Dr. Cade feels otherwise. So I've got a little bit of time here, 10 minutes or 5 minutes, I don't know, to take a couple of questions before I've got to get back to the airport. So thank you so much for listening.